It usually begins quietly, almost without notice, that subtle feeling that something about the way we are living isn't quite right. On the surface, everything may seem functional. You wake up, go through your routines, respond to messages, meet responsibilities, and perhaps even achieve what you once thought you wanted. Yet underneath, there's a persistent question that doesn't fully go away. Is this really how life is meant to feel? Living is often mistaken for managing. We manage time, tasks, expectations, and impressions. We become skilled at keeping things together, at appearing composed, at moving from one obligation to the next without pausing long enough to ask whether the direction itself makes sense. Over time, this creates a strange kind of distance between who we are and how we live. The outer life becomes structured and efficient, while the inner life grows quieter, sometimes even neglected. To truly understand how to live, it helps to step away from the idea that life is something to be optimized like a machine. Living is not a problem to solve. It is something to experience, to shape, and to understand gradually. It involves paying attention to what feels real, not just what looks right from the outside. One of the first shifts that changes everything is learning to notice your own patterns without immediately trying to fix them. Most people react quickly to discomfort. If something feels off, they distract themselves, adjust their environment, or chase a new goal. But there is value in simply observing. When you slow down and look closely, you begin to see how much of your behavior is automatic. You respond in certain ways not because you consciously choose to, but because you have repeated those responses for years. For example, consider how often decisions are driven by fear rather than clarity. Fear of falling behind, fear of disappointing others, fear of missing out. These fears can quietly shape entire lives. You might choose a career path not because it feels meaningful, but because it feels safe. You might stay in situations that drain you simply because change feels uncertain. Over time, these small decisions accumulate, and before you know it, you are living a life that feels disconnected from your deeper sense of self. Living well requires a kind of honesty that can be uncomfortable at first. It means asking yourself questions that don't have easy answers. What actually matters to me, beyond what I've been told should matter? What kind of experiences make me feel alive, not just occupied? Where am I acting out of habit instead of intention? These questions are not meant to create pressure, they are meant to create awareness. Because awareness is where change begins, not forced effort. When you clearly see something, you don't have to convince yourself to act differently. The shift happens naturally. Another important realization is that life is not something that will eventually begin once certain conditions are met. Many people live as if the real part of life is always just ahead. They tell themselves that once they achieve a certain milestone, everything will feel different. Once they have more money, more time, more recognition, then they will finally relax, connect, or explore what they truly care about. But this way of thinking quietly postpones living. It turns the present moment into a waiting room for a future that may never arrive in the way you imagine. Meanwhile, the days pass, filled with small moments that go unnoticed because attention is always fixed on what comes next. Learning how to live involves bringing your attention back to what is already here, not in a superficial way, but in a grounded, attentive way. It means noticing how you spend your time, how you speak to people, how you respond to ordinary situations. These are not small things. They are the substance of your life. Relationships, for instance, are often treated as background elements, something that simply exists alongside your goals. But when you look more closely, you begin to see that the quality of your relationships shapes your entire experience. A simple conversation can either leave you feeling understood or isolated. The way you listen, the way you express yourself, the way you handle disagreement, these are all part of living, not separate from it. There is also a tendency to overcomplicate what it means to live well. People search for elaborate systems, strict routines, or perfect philosophies. But often, the most meaningful shifts are simple: being fully present in a conversation, taking time to reflect instead of constantly reacting, choosing honesty over convenience. These are small actions, but they have a way of reshaping how life feels from the inside. At the same time, it's important to recognize a narrower life, one where decisions are made based on safety rather than possibility. Living fully requires a willingness to face some degree of uncertainty without immediately trying to control it. What begins to emerge from all of this is a different way of approaching life. Instead of chasing a fixed idea of success or happiness, you start to focus on alignment. You pay attention to whether your actions match your values, whether your time reflects what you truly care about, whether your choices feel intentional rather than automatic. And as this awareness deepens, something subtle but important starts to shift. Life no longer feels like something you are trying to keep up with. It begins to feel like something you are actively participating in, moment by moment. But this raises an even deeper question: one that changes how you see everything that follows. If living is not about chasing outcomes or avoiding discomfort, then what is it really about at its core? That deeper question tends to stay with you once it appears, quietly reshaping how you look at everything. If living is not about endlessly chasing outcomes or constructing a life that looks impressive from the outside, then what remains? What is the core of a life that actually feels real when you are inside it? The answer begins to reveal itself when you shift your attention from what you achieve to how you experience. Most people are trained, almost from childhood, to measure life in terms of results, grades, promotions, income, recognition. These markers become the structure around which decisions are made. And while they can provide direction, they can also create a narrow definition of what it means to live well. When you look more closely, you start to notice that achievements have a surprisingly short emotional lifespan. What once felt like a major milestone quickly becomes normal. The excitement fades, the sense of arrival disappears, and the mind begins searching for the next target. This cycle can continue indefinitely, creating a life that is always in motion but rarely at rest. Living, in a deeper sense, is less about accumulation and more about attention. It is about how fully you inhabit your own experience. This does not mean withdrawing from ambition or responsibility, but it does mean understanding that the quality of your attention determines the quality of your life. Two people can live through the same set of circumstances and have entirely different experiences, simply because of how they relate to what is happening. Attention is often scattered without us realizing it. You might be in a conversation while thinking about something else. You might be working toward a goal while constantly comparing yourself to others. You might be resting, but your mind is still replaying past events or anticipating future ones. In all of these cases, you are physically present, but mentally elsewhere. Learning how to live involves bringing these scattered pieces back together. It means training yourself, gently and consistently, to be where you are, not as a rigid practice, but as a way of relating to life. When you give your full attention to something, even something ordinary, it changes how it feels. A simple walk becomes more than just movement. A conversation becomes more than an exchange of words. Time slows down, not in a literal sense, but in how it is perceived. This kind of presence also changes how you deal with difficulty. When something uncomfortable happens, the instinct is often to resist it, to push it away or distract yourself. But resistance tends to amplify the discomfort. It creates a layer of tension on top of the original experience. On the other hand, when you allow yourself to face what is happening without immediately trying to escape it, something shifts. The experience may still be difficult, but it becomes clearer, more defined, and often more manageable. There is a quiet strength in this approach. It does not rely on controlling everything or avoiding uncertainty. Instead, it builds a kind of stability from within. You begin to trust that you can handle what arises, not because you have eliminated risk, but because you are no longer constantly fighting your own experience. Another important aspect of living well is understanding the role of meaning. People often search for a single, overarching purpose that will give their life direction. But meaning is not always something you find once and hold on to forever. It is something that can be created and recreated through your actions. Meaning emerges when what you do feels connected to something beyond immediate gratification. It can be found in work that challenges you, in relationships that deepen over time, in moments of contribution or creativity. These experiences do not always feel. Not every moment needs to be significant. Part of living is allowing space for simplicity, for moments that are light, unstructured, and free from expectation. The balance between depth and ease is what gives life its texture. You also begin to notice how much of your life is shaped by unconscious comparison. Without even intending to, you measure your progress against others. You evaluate your choices based on what seems successful or acceptable in a broader social context. This can create a constant sense of inadequacy, even when your life is objectively stable or even fulfilling. Stepping away from comparison does not mean ignoring the world around you. It means recognizing that your path does not need to mirror anyone else's. What feels meaningful to one person may feel empty to another. When you stop using external standards as your primary reference point, you create space to define your life more authentically. This requires a certain level of courage, because it often involves going against expectations, both your own and those of others. It may mean choosing a slower path when speed is valued, or prioritizing depth when surface-level success is rewarded. These choices are not always immediately understood or validated, but over time, they tend to create a more grounded and coherent life. As you continue to explore what it means to live, you may start to see that many of the questions you once asked begin to lose their urgency. Instead of constantly wondering whether you are doing the right thing, you become more interested in how you are doing whatever you are doing. The focus shifts from external validation to internal alignment. And yet, even with all this awareness, there is still something that can quietly disrupt the way we live, something subtle but powerful that shapes decisions without being fully seen. It influences how we spend our time, how we relate to others, and how we see ourselves. Understanding this hidden force is what brings the next layer of clarity, and without recognizing it, it becomes difficult to fully understand why life sometimes feels more complicated than it needs to be. There is a quiet force that shapes much of how people live, and it rarely announces itself directly. It works in the background, influencing choices, reactions, and even identity. Most people feel its effects without clearly recognizing it, and because of that, they often assume their struggles are more complicated than they actually are. That force is the need to protect and maintain a certain image of oneself. From an early age, you begin to form ideas about who you are. Some of these ideas come from your own experiences, but many are shaped by how others respond to you. You learn what gets approval, what gets ignored, and what gets rejected. Over time, these patterns solidify into a kind of internal identity, a version of yourself that you try to uphold. At first, this might seem harmless, even necessary. Having a sense of identity can provide direction and stability. But the problem arises when this identity becomes rigid, when you begin to defend it rather than question it. You start to act in ways that reinforce the image, even if those actions no longer feel natural or true. For example, if you see yourself as someone who is always capable and in control, you may avoid situations where you might fail or appear uncertain. Not because those situations are inherently bad, but because they threaten the image you've built. Similarly, if you identify as someone who is easygoing and agreeable, you might suppress your own needs or opinions to maintain that perception. This creates a subtle tension. On the surface, you are maintaining consistency, but underneath, you are limiting yourself. You are no longer responding freely to life as it unfolds. Instead, you are filtering your responses through the question, does this fit who I think I am, or who I want others to see? Living this way requires constant effort. It means you are always monitoring yourself, adjusting your behavior, managing impression. Understanding how to live more freely involves loosening this attachment to a fixed identity. This does not mean losing your sense of self, but rather allowing it to be more flexible, more responsive to the present moment. Instead of asking, what would someone like me do, you begin to ask, what actually makes sense here? This shift creates space for growth. When you are not bound by a rigid self-image, you can explore different ways of thinking and acting without feeling like you are betraying yourself. You can change your mind, try new approaches, and even acknowledge when you were wrong, all without turning it into a personal crisis. Another layer of this hidden force shows up in how you relate to other people. Much of social interaction is shaped by the desire to be seen in a certain way. You might present a polished version of yourself, avoid vulnerability, or say what you think others want to hear. While this can make interactions smoother on the surface, it often reduces their depth. Real connection tends to emerge when there is less performance involved. When you are not overly focused on managing how you are perceived, you become more present, more genuine. Conversations become less about maintaining an image and more about understanding and being understood. This does not mean sharing everything indiscriminately, but it does mean being more honest in how you show up. There is also an interesting paradox here. The more you try to control how others see you, the less authentic your presence feels. And the less you focus on controlling that perception, the more natural and grounded you appear. People tend to respond not to the image you project, but to the sense of ease or tension behind it. This extends to how you evaluate your own life. When identity becomes central, you may start to measure your worth based on how well you are maintaining that identity. Success feels like confirmation, while failure feels like a threat. This creates a fragile sense of self, one that depends heavily on external outcomes. Letting go of this dynamic involves redefining how you see yourself. Instead of viewing yourself as a fixed set of traits or roles, you begin to see yourself as something more fluid, an ongoing process rather than a finished product. This perspective allows you to engage with life more openly, without the constant pressure to prove or protect something. At the same time, it is important to recognize that this shift does not happen all at once. The patterns of identity are deeply ingrained, and they tend to reappear, especially in situations that feel important or uncertain. The goal is not to eliminate them completely, but to become aware of them as they arise. When you notice yourself acting out of image maintenance rather than genuine response, that awareness itself creates a choice. You can continue the pattern, or you can experiment with a different way of being. Over time, these small moments of awareness accumulate, gradually changing how you relate to yourself and the world. As this happens, life often begins to feel less constrained. There is more room for spontaneity, for curiosity, for genuine engagement. You are no longer carrying the same weight of self-consciousness into every situation. Instead, you move through experiences with a bit more ease, a bit more openness. But even with this increased freedom, there is still a fundamental challenge that remains, something that influences how you experience time itself. It shapes your sense of urgency, your regrets about the past, and your expectations for the future. And until this time has a way of quietly controlling how life feels, even when you are not consciously thinking about it. It shapes your sense of urgency, your worries, your plans, and your regrets. Most people live with a constant pull into directions, either replaying what has already happened or anticipating what might come next. And in doing so, they miss the only place where life is actually unfolding. The past often carries a certain weight. It holds memories, decisions, mistakes, and moments that seem to define who you are. Some of these memories are pleasant, something you revisit with a sense of nostalgia. Others carry regret or discomfort, moments you wish had gone differently. Without realizing it, you may begin to organize your present life around these past experiences. You might avoid certain opportunities because of something that didn't work before. You might hold on to a particular identity because it was once validated. Or you might keep replaying a mistake, as if thinking about it repeatedly could somehow change it. In all of these cases, the past is no longer just something that happened. It becomes something you are still living inside. At the same time, the future exerts its own kind of pressure. It represents possibility, but also uncertainty. You think about what you need to achieve, what could go wrong, what might happen if things don't unfold as expected. Planning is necessary, of course, but it can easily turn into constant anticipation. The mind moves ahead, trying to secure outcomes that are never fully within your control. When your attention is consistently divided between past and future, the present moment becomes secondary. It turns into a narrow bridge you are always crossing, rather than a place you are actually inhabiting. This creates a subtle but persistent sense of restlessness. Even when nothing is immediately wrong, it feels like something is unfinished, something still needs to be resolved. Learning how to live more fully involves changing your relationship with time, not by ignoring the past or neglecting the future, but by placing them in their proper context. The past is a source of information, not a place of residence. The future is a direction, not a guarantee. The present is where your life is actually taking shape. This shift begins with noticing how often your mind drifts away from what is happening now. You might be engaged in an activity, but part of your attention is elsewhere, thinking about something that has already happened or something that hasn't happened yet. This is such a common pattern that it often goes unnoticed. Bringing your attention back is not about forcing concentration or eliminating thought. It is about gently recognizing when you have drifted and returning to what is in front of you. Over time, this simple act can change how you experience time. Moments begin to feel more complete, less like something to get through and more like something to engage with. There is also a deeper layer to this. Much of the anxiety people feel is tied to an imagined future. The mind creates scenarios, often negative ones, and reacts to them as if they are already real. This creates a sense of pressure that does not actually exist in the present moment. When you bring your focus back to what is happening now, many of these imagined pressures lose their intensity. You begin to see that, in this moment, you are often more capable and stable than your thoughts suggest. This does not eliminate challenges, but it changes how you relate to them. Regret works in a similar way, but in the opposite direction. It ties your attention to something that cannot be changed. You replay events, analyze what went wrong, and imagine how things could have been different. While reflection can be useful, excessive rumination tends to keep you stuck. Letting go of this pattern does not mean dismissing the past. It means learning from it without allowing it to define your present experience. It means recognizing that while you cannot change what has already happened, you can influence how you respond now. Another important aspect of time is how it affects your sense of pace. Many people feel like they are always behind, as if there is an invisible timeline they are failing to meet. This creates a constant sense of urgency, even when it is not necessary. You rush through tasks, hurry through conversations, and move quickly from one thing to the next, rarely allowing yourself to fully settle. This sense of rushing often comes from external comparisons or internal expectations. You see where others are, or where you think you should be, and you try to close the gap as quickly as possible. But living in this way can make life feel fragmented, as if each moment is just a stepping stone to something else, than constantly thinking about what comes next. This often leads to better outcomes, not worse, because your actions become more focused and intentional. As you begin to shift your relationship with time, something interesting happens. The urgency that once drove many of your decisions starts to soften. You still care about what you are doing, but the pressure feels different. It becomes less about racing toward an imagined future and more about engaging fully with the present. And in that space, a new kind of clarity begins to emerge. You start to see more clearly what actually matters, not in an abstract sense, but in the reality of your day-to-day life. But even with this clarity, there is still one more layer to understand, something that quietly influences how you make decisions and how you define what truly matters in the first place. At some point, after you begin to see through the noise of constant doing, the pressure of identity, and the pull of time, a more subtle question starts to take shape. It is not about how to manage life better, or how to feel more in control. It is about something quieter and more personal. What actually matters to you when everything unnecessary is stripped away? This question is easy to overlook because much of modern life is built to answer it for you. There are ready-made definitions of success, fulfillment, and even happiness. You are shown what to aim for, what to value, what to prioritize. And if you follow these paths closely enough, you can build a life that appears complete from the outside. But appearance and experience are not the same. A life can look full while feeling empty, structured while feeling disconnected. This is where many people begin to sense that something is missing, even if they cannot immediately explain what it is. Understanding what truly matters is not about adopting new ideals. It is about removing what is not essential and paying attention to what remains. When you stop chasing every possible outcome, when you step back from constant comparison, when you are less driven by fear or image, certain things begin to stand out more clearly. You start to notice which moments feel meaningful, not because they are impressive, but because they feel genuine. It could be a deep conversation where you are fully present. It could be a moment of quiet where your mind is not racing. It could be work that challenges you in a way that feels engaging, rather than draining. These experiences often share a common quality. They are not forced. What matters tends to reveal itself through a sense of alignment. There is less internal resistance, less need to convince yourself that something is important. Instead, there is a natural pull towards certain ways of living, certain kinds of effort, certain kinds of connection. At the same time, it becomes clear that not everything deserves equal attention. One of the most overlooked aspects of living well is the ability to let go. Not in a dramatic sense, but in a quiet, consistent way. Letting go of activities that consume time without adding value. Letting go of expectations that no longer feel relevant. Letting go of the need to keep up with every opportunity or trend. This process can feel uncomfortable at first, because it goes against the habit of accumulation. There is often a belief that more options, more achievements, and more experiences will naturally lead to a better life. But in reality, too much can create noise. It can make it harder to see what actually matters, because your attention is spread too thin. Living with more clarity often means choosing less, but choosing more deliberately. It means accepting that every choice comes with a trade-off. When you say yes to something, you are also saying no to something else, whether you realize it or not. Being aware of this changes how you make decisions. You become more thoughtful, less reactive. Another important realization is that what matters is not fixed. It can evolve over time as you grow and as your circumstances change. What felt meaningful at one stage of your life may no longer feel the same later on. This is not a problem to solve, but a natural part of living. The key is to stay connected to your own experience, rather than holding on to outdated definitions of what your life should look like. This requires a kind of ongoing attention, a willingness to check in with yourself honestly, without immediately defaulting to habit or expectation. There is also a deeper layer to what matters, one that goes beyond personal preference. It has to do with how you relate to other people and the world around you. A life focused only on individual satisfaction can feel limited over time. There is often a desire for something more connected, something that extends beyond your own immediate your work, the way you respond to situations that require patience or understanding. These moments may seem ordinary, but they shape the overall quality of your life in a very real way. When your actions reflect not just what you want, but also what you value on a deeper level, life begins to feel more coherent. There is less internal conflict, less sense of being pulled in different directions. Your choices start to align more naturally with your sense of what is important. And yet, even when you reach this point of greater clarity, there is still one final shift that brings everything together. It is not about adding anything new, but about seeing something that has been present all along, something so familiar that it is often overlooked. Understanding this changes not just how you live, but how you experience being alive in the most fundamental sense. And once you see it clearly, it becomes difficult to return to the way things felt before. If you follow this path of attention, honesty, and simplification far enough, you begin to notice something that was always there, quietly present beneath every experience. It is not something you achieve or acquire. It does not depend on circumstances, success, or even clarity. It is simply the fact that you are aware, that you are here, experiencing life as it unfolds. This might seem too obvious to matter at first. After all, awareness is something you use constantly without thinking about it. You see, hear, think, react, plan. But rarely do you turn your attention toward the experience of being aware itself. You are usually focused on what you are aware of, not the awareness behind it. And yet, this subtle shift changes everything. When you begin to notice awareness itself, you step out of the constant stream of thoughts, worries, and interpretations, even if only for a moment. You start to see that much of what feels overwhelming is not the experience itself, but the way the mind continuously comments on it. Thoughts have a way of presenting themselves as facts. A worry about the future feels like a real problem. A judgment about yourself feels like a fixed truth. A memory feels like something that still defines you. But when you observe these thoughts more closely, you begin to see that they are events happening within your awareness, not absolute realities. This does not mean dismissing your thoughts or trying to silence them. It means changing your relationship to them. Instead of being fully absorbed in every thought, you begin to notice them as they arise and pass. This creates a small but powerful space between you and the constant mental activity. In that space, there is a different kind of stability. It is not based on controlling your environment or ensuring that everything goes according to plan. It comes from recognizing that, regardless of what is happening, there is a part of your experience that remains steady. Thoughts change, emotions shift, circumstances evolve, but awareness itself is consistent. This realization has a quiet but profound effect. It reduces the sense of being constantly pushed and pulled by external events. When something difficult happens, you still feel it, but you are not completely defined by it. When something pleasant happens, you can enjoy it without feeling the need to hold on to it. Over time, this changes how you relate to both success and failure. Success becomes something you experience, not something you need to cling to for your identity. Failure becomes something you learn from, not something that diminishes your sense of self. There is more flexibility, more resilience, and less fear tied to outcomes. It also changes how you experience ordinary moments. When you are less caught up in constant mental noise, even simple experiences begin to feel richer. A quiet moment is no longer something to fill. A routine activity is no longer something to rush through. There is a sense of being present that does not depend on anything extraordinary happening. This does not mean that life becomes permanently calm or easy. Challenges still arise, emotions still fluctuate, and uncertainty is still part of the experience. But your relationship to these things becomes less reactive. There is more space to respond rather than simply react. One of the most interesting aspects of this shift is that it cannot be forced. You cannot think your way into it or turn it into another goal to achieve. It emerges naturally when you begin to pay attention in a different way, when you become curious about your own experience rather than constantly trying to control it. And in a way, this brings everything full circle. The initial question of how to live no longer feels like something that requires a complex answer. It becomes less about following a specific set of rules and more present enough to see clearly, honest enough to respond authentically, and flexible enough to grow without losing your sense of grounding. There is a certain simplicity in this, but it is not the kind of simplicity that comes from ignoring complexity. It comes from seeing through what is unnecessary. When you are no longer driven entirely by fear, comparison, identity, or constant anticipation, life begins to feel less crowded. And in that space, something else becomes possible. Not a dramatic transformation, but a steady, quiet sense of ease. A feeling that you are no longer chasing life or trying to hold it together, but actually living it as it unfolds. That is where the real shift happens. Not in what you have, not in how others see you, but in how you experience being here at all. And once you begin to live from that place, the question of how to live slowly fades, replaced by something far more direct and far more meaningful: simply living. Even after reaching that quieter, more grounded way of living, something interesting begins to happen. Life does not suddenly become perfect, nor does every moment feel peaceful or clear. Instead, you start to notice how easily old patterns try to return. The mind drifts back into comparison, urgency creeps in, identity starts to rebuild itself in subtle ways. It becomes clear that living with awareness is not a one-time realization, but something that needs to be renewed again and again. This is where many people misunderstand what it means to live well. They assume that once they have clarity, it should stay with them permanently. But clarity is not something you store. It is something you practice. It shows up in how you pay attention, how you respond, and how often you remember to come back to the present when you've drifted away. There is no final state where everything is resolved. Instead, there is a rhythm. You become aware, you lose that awareness, and then you notice again. At first, this cycle might feel frustrating, as if you are not making progress. But over time, you begin to see that the noticing itself is the progress. Each time you return to awareness, you strengthen your ability to live more consciously. This changes how you think about discipline. It is no longer about forcing yourself into rigid structures or trying to control every aspect of your behavior. Instead, discipline becomes something quieter and more consistent. It is the willingness to return, again and again, to what matters, to your attention, your values, your presence. In practical terms, this might look very simple: pausing before reacting in a conversation, taking a moment to notice how you actually feel instead of immediately distracting yourself, choosing to focus on one thing at a time instead of constantly splitting your attention. These are small actions, but they gradually reshape how you experience your life. Another important shift happens in how you relate to uncertainty. Earlier, uncertainty may have felt like something to eliminate or avoid. It created tension because it represented what you could not control. But as you become more grounded in your own awareness, uncertainty begins to feel different. You start to see that uncertainty is not just a source of anxiety, but also a space of possibility. If everything were completely predictable, life would become rigid and limited. It is uncertainty that allows for change, for growth, for new experiences that you could not have planned in advance. This does not mean you stop planning or thinking ahead. It means you hold your plans more lightly. You allow room for adjustment. You recognize that while direction is useful, rigidity often creates unnecessary stress. There is also a shift in how you experience effort. Many people associate effort with strain, with pushing through resistance. And sometimes that is necessary. But not all meaningful effort feels heavy. When your actions are aligned with what matters to you, effort can feel more like engagement than struggle. You might still work hard, still face challenges, still experience moments of fatigue. But there is a difference between effort that comes from alignment and effort that comes from pressure. One feels purposeful, the other feels draining. Learning to recognize this difference helps you make better decisions about where to invest your energy. As this way of living becomes more familiar, your relationship with yourself also begins to change. There is less harsh judgment, less constant evaluation of whether you are doing things perfectly. You begin to treat yourself with the same kind of understanding that you might offer to someone else. This does not mean lowering your standards or avoiding responsibility. It means recognizing that growth is not a straight line. You will make change more sustainable. When you are not constantly criticizing yourself, you are more willing to look honestly at your behavior. And that honesty is what allows real change to happen. At the same time, your view of other people begins to shift as well. You start to see that they are also shaped by their own patterns, their own fears, their own attempts to manage life as best as they can. This creates a greater sense of understanding, even in situations where you might still disagree or set boundaries. Relationships become less about control and more about connection. You are less focused on trying to change others or prove yourself right, and more interested in understanding and being understood. This does not make every relationship easy, but it often makes them more real. And through all of this, there is a growing sense that life is not something you need to constantly figure out before you can live it. It is something you are already in the middle of, whether you feel ready or not. The search for the perfect way to live slowly gives way to a more direct experience of living itself. You begin to trust that you can navigate what comes, not because you have all the answers, but because you are paying attention. And yet, even with this trust, there is one final layer that often goes unnoticed. It is not about what you do or how you think, but about something even more subtle: the way you relate to the fact that life is always changing, and that nothing you experience, no matter how meaningful, can be held onto forever. Understanding this does not take anything away from life. In fact, it tends to deepen it in a way that is difficult to see until you face it directly. There is a quiet truth that sits beneath everything you experience, and most of the time, it stays just outside of your attention. Not because it is hidden, but because it is uncomfortable to fully accept. Everything changes. Every moment passes. Every experience, no matter how meaningful, eventually becomes a memory. At first, this can feel unsettling. There is a natural tendency to hold on to what feels good and to resist what feels difficult. You want certain moments to last, certain relationships to remain unchanged, certain versions of yourself to stay intact. But life does not work that way. It moves, constantly and without pause. When you resist this movement, life begins to feel fragile. You start to cling to outcomes, trying to preserve them. You become anxious about losing what you have, or frustrated when things don't stay the way you expected. Even positive experiences can carry a subtle tension, because part of you is already aware that they will not last. But when you begin to understand change more deeply, something shifts. Instead of seeing it as a problem, you start to see it as the very thing that gives life its richness. If nothing changed, there would be no growth, no new experiences, no sense of movement. The same impermanence that makes things feel temporary is also what makes them meaningful. Think about how you experience a moment when you are fully aware of it. A conversation, a quiet evening, a small moment of connection. Part of what makes it valuable is precisely the fact that it will pass. You cannot repeat it exactly. You cannot hold on to it. And because of that, it becomes something you naturally want to be present for. This changes how you relate to both joy and difficulty. When something good happens, you can appreciate it without needing to grasp it tightly. You allow yourself to experience it fully, knowing that it is part of a larger flow. And when something difficult happens, you are less likely to feel as though it will last forever. You begin to see it as something that is also moving, also changing. There is a kind of balance that emerges from this understanding. You are no longer trying to freeze life in place, but you are also not detached from it. You care, you engage, you participate fully, but without the constant tension of trying to control what cannot be controlled. This perspective also changes how you think about loss. Loss is often seen as something purely negative, something to avoid at all costs. And while it can be deeply painful, it is also an unavoidable part of living. Every connection, every experience, exists within the reality that it will not last forever. Avoiding this truth does not protect you from it. It only makes it harder to face when it inevitably arrives. But when you begin to accept impermanence as a fundamental part of life, loss takes on a different quality. It is still painful, but it is no longer meaningless. It becomes part of the same process that allows anything to exist in the first place. This does not mean you become indifferent or emotionally distant. In fact, it often has the opposite of. Granted, there is also a certain freedom in this. When you are not trying to hold on to everything, you create space for new experiences to enter your life. You become more adaptable, more open to change. Instead of seeing change as a disruption, you begin to see it as a natural continuation. This applies not only to external circumstances, but also to yourself. You are not a fixed version of who you are right now. Your thoughts, preferences, and perspectives will continue to evolve. Holding too tightly to a specific identity can create resistance to this natural growth. When you allow yourself to change, you give yourself permission to move with life rather than against it. You are less concerned with staying consistent and more interested in staying honest. This creates a sense of flexibility that makes life feel less rigid and more responsive. As all of these pieces come together, awareness, presence, clarity about what matters, and an understanding of change, something becomes very clear. Living is not about reaching a final state where everything is perfectly arranged. It is about participating in a process that is always unfolding. There will still be uncertainty. There will still be moments of confusion, difficulty, and doubt. But there will also be moments of clarity, connection, and quiet satisfaction. And none of these need to be permanent in order to be meaningful. In the end, the question of how to live is not something that gets answered once and for all. It is something you continue to explore through your own experience. Not by searching for a perfect formula, but by paying attention, adjusting, and staying open to what each moment brings. And when you begin to live in this way, something subtle but profound settles in. You stop asking whether you are living correctly, and instead, you start experiencing life more directly, more honestly, and with a deeper sense of ease. Not because everything is certain, but because you are no longer waiting for certainty to begin truly living. At a certain point, something becomes noticeably different in the way you move through life. It is not dramatic, and it does not announce itself with any clear milestone. But there is a growing sense that you are no longer constantly searching for something to fix, prove, or complete. The background tension that once shaped many of your decisions begins to soften. You may still have goals, responsibilities, and moments of uncertainty, but they no longer carry the same weight. There is less urgency tied to becoming someone else or arriving at a final version of your life. Instead, there is a quiet recognition that you are already in the middle of it, and that this moment, however ordinary it may seem, is not separate from the life you were trying to reach. This changes how you approach even the simplest parts of your day. Activities that once felt like things to get through begin to feel more like places to be, not because they have changed externally, but because your relationship to them has shifted. You are less distracted, less divided, more present in what you are doing. There is also a growing sense of trust. Not a blind optimism that everything will work out exactly as you want, but a steadier confidence that you can meet whatever arises. This trust does not come from having control over outcomes. It comes from experience, from seeing that you have already moved through uncertainty many times before, even when you didn't feel ready. Because of this, decision-making becomes simpler. You are less caught up in trying to predict every possible outcome or guarantee the perfect choice. Instead, you focus more on what feels aligned in the present, what makes sense based on what you know now. You still think things through, but you are no longer paralyzed by the need for certainty. This simplicity also extends to how you see success and failure. They begin to lose their rigid definitions. Success is no longer just about achieving specific results, and failure is no longer something that diminishes you. Both become part of a larger process of learning and adjusting. When something goes well, you appreciate it without needing to build your identity around it. When something does not go as planned, you reflect on it without turning it into a personal judgment. This creates a kind of emotional balance that makes it easier to keep moving forward without carrying unnecessary weight. Another noticeable shift is in how you use your energy. Before, a lot of energy may have been spent on overthinking, worrying, comparing, or trying to. This does not mean you are always calm or always focused. There are still moments of distraction, frustration, and doubt. But they pass more easily because you are not holding on to them in the same way. You recognize them as temporary, as part of the natural movement of your experience. Relationships often become more grounded as well. You are less interested in performing or proving something, and more interested in being present and honest. This tends to create interactions that feel more real, even if they are not always smooth or comfortable. You also become more aware of how little is actually needed to feel a sense of completeness in a moment. It is not about having everything figured out or perfectly arranged. Sometimes it is simply about being fully there, without the constant urge to be somewhere else. This does not remove ambition or the desire to grow. It simply places them in a different context. Growth becomes something you engage with, not something you chase out of a sense of lack. You are not trying to fill a gap in yourself, but rather exploring what is possible from where you already are. Over time, this creates a life that feels more cohesive. Your actions, thoughts, and values begin to align more naturally. There is less internal conflict, less sense of being pulled in different directions. Decisions feel clearer, not because they are always easy, but because they are less clouded by unnecessary noise. And yet, even in this more settled way of living, there remains an important understanding. Life does not stop changing. New challenges will come. Circumstances will shift. People will enter and leave your life. Your own perspectives will continue to evolve. The difference is that you are no longer trying to build a life that is immune to change. Instead, you are learning how to move with it, how to stay grounded even as things shift around you. In this way, living becomes less about reaching a conclusion and more about maintaining a certain quality of attention and presence over time. It is something you return to, again and again, in both ordinary and significant moments. And as this way of being becomes more natural, the original question of how to live no longer feels like a problem to solve. It becomes something much simpler, something that does not require constant analysis. It becomes a quiet, ongoing experience of showing up, paying attention, and responding honestly to whatever is in front of you. And perhaps that is the closest you come to an answer, not a fixed conclusion, but a way of moving through life that feels steady, open, and real, even as everything continues to change. In the end, what becomes most noticeable is not what you have added to your life, but what has quietly fallen away. The constant mental noise that once filled every gap begins to lose its grip. The need to always be somewhere else, to become someone more complete, to resolve everything before you can feel at ease, it starts to dissolve. What remains is not a perfect life, but a more direct one. You begin to see that much of what once felt complicated was not coming from life itself, but from the layers placed on top of it. The overthinking, the comparisons, the pressure to meet invisible standards, the constant negotiation with time, all of it created a sense that living was something difficult to get right. But when those layers thin out, even slightly, something simpler begins to come through. Life reveals itself not as a problem to solve, but as something to experience, moment by moment, without the need to constantly interpret or evaluate it. There is a certain honesty in this way of living. You are less concerned with how things appear and more connected to how they actually feel. Decisions are less about maintaining an image or meeting expectations, and more about responding to what is real in front of you. This honesty also brings a kind of quiet clarity. You start to recognize when something is aligned and when it is not, without needing to overanalyze it. You can feel the difference between acting out of habit and acting out of intention. And while you may not always choose perfectly, you are more aware of the choice itself. There is also less resistance to the natural ups and downs of life. You no longer expect every moment to feel good or every situation to go smoothly. You understand that discomfort, uncertainty, and change are not signs that something is wrong, but simply part of the experience. Because of this, you spend less energy trying to avoid or control what you cannot fully manage. That energy becomes available for something else, for attention, for presence, for actually engaging with your life as it unfolds. Even the idea of control begins to shift. Instead of trying to control outcomes, you focus on any external condition. There is also a subtle but important change in how you relate to yourself. The constant self-criticism, the need to measure up, the habit of turning every mistake into a personal flaw, these patterns begin to lose their intensity. Not because you ignore your shortcomings, but because you see them more clearly and more calmly. You understand that you are not a fixed thing that needs to be perfected. You are a process, constantly changing, learning, adjusting. This makes it easier to take responsibility without turning it into self-judgment. It creates space for growth that is steady rather than forced. As this way of living deepens, even ordinary moments begin to feel more complete. There is less of a gap between what you are doing and where you want to be. You are not constantly waiting for something else to begin. You are already inside the experience. This does not mean that every moment feels meaningful or profound. Many moments are simple, even uneventful, but they are no longer empty in the same way. There is a quiet sense of being there, of not needing to escape or rush through them. And perhaps this is where everything comes together. Not in a grand realization or a final answer, but in a steady shift in how you experience being alive. You stop asking if you are doing life correctly. You stop measuring every step against an imagined standard. You stop postponing your attention until everything is in place. Instead, you begin to live in a way that is more immediate, more grounded, and more real. You notice what is in front of you. You respond as honestly as you can. You adjust when needed. You let things change. You let yourself change. There is no final state to reach, no permanent clarity to hold on to. But there is a way of being that you can return to, again and again, no matter what is happening around you. And in that return, something becomes clear without needing to be explained. Living is not something you figure out once. It is something you keep doing, with awareness, with openness, and with a quiet willingness to meet each moment as it comes. And after everything has been seen, questioned, simplified, and understood, life continues. Not as a conclusion, but as something open, unfinished, and constantly unfolding. This is where a deeper kind of maturity begins to take shape, one that is not based on having answers, but on being comfortable without needing them all the time. There is a subtle shift from trying to understand life completely to participating in it more fully. Earlier, there may have been a strong need to make sense of everything, to organize experience into clear ideas and conclusions. But over time, you begin to see that not everything needs to be resolved in order to be lived. Some things remain uncertain. Some questions stay open. And instead of creating tension, this starts to feel natural. You allow space for not knowing, without immediately trying to fill it. This creates a different kind of intelligence, one that is not just analytical, but responsive. You begin to trust your ability to meet situations as they arise, even when they are unfamiliar. This trust is not based on certainty, but on experience. You have seen that life does not wait for you to feel fully prepared. It moves, and you move with it. There is also a growing sense of independence in how you think, not in a rebellious or isolating way, but in a grounded way. You are less influenced by every opinion, trend, or external expectation. You listen, you consider, but you do not automatically adopt. This makes your decisions feel more your own. Even when they are difficult or uncertain, they carry a different kind of weight. They are not just reactions to external pressure, but expressions of your own understanding. At the same time, this independence does not separate you from others. In fact, it often makes connection more genuine. When you are not trying to fit into a specific image or meet every expectation, your interactions become more honest. There is less performance, less filtering, and more real engagement. You start to appreciate the simplicity of being with someone without needing to impress, convince, or compare. Conversations become less about proving something and more about sharing perspective. This creates a sense of ease that cannot be forced. There is also a clearer relationship with effort and rest. You begin to understand that both are necessary, and neither needs to be extreme. You can work with focus and intention, but also step back without guilt. You no longer feel the need to constantly justify your pace. This balance allows your energy to be used more wisely. Instead of pushing yourself in every direction, you become more selective. You invest your time and attention because your attention is not constantly pulled in conflicting directions. There is also a different relationship with progress. Earlier, progress may have been measured in clear, external ways, achievements, milestones, visible changes. Now, it becomes more internal and less obvious. Progress might look like responding more calmly in a situation that once triggered you. It might be noticing a pattern in your thinking and choosing not to follow it. It might be being more present in a moment that you would have previously rushed through. These shifts are subtle, but they are significant. They reflect a deeper change in how you experience life, not just what you accomplish within it. And as this continues, there is less need to constantly evaluate whether you are moving in the right direction. You are still aware, still reflective, but not in a way that creates pressure. It becomes more of a quiet check than a constant judgment. There is also an acceptance that life will always include a mix of clarity and confusion, ease and difficulty, certainty and doubt. You no longer expect one to completely replace the other. Instead, you see them as part of the same experience. This makes it easier to stay grounded even when things are not clear. You do not feel the need to rush toward resolution. You can stay with a question a little longer, explore it, and allow understanding to develop over time. And perhaps most importantly, there is a sense that nothing is being postponed anymore. You are not waiting for the perfect moment to begin living more fully. You are already doing it, in whatever way you can, right now. This does not mean every moment is used perfectly. It means you are no longer disconnected from your own life while trying to improve it. And in that, there is a quiet completeness. Not because everything is finished, but because nothing essential is missing from this moment. Life continues, as it always has. But your way of being within it has changed. Less force, more awareness. Less chasing, more presence. Less certainty, more openness. And from here, there is nothing left. And eventually, even the idea of trying to live well begins to fade into the background. Not because it is no longer important, but because it becomes natural. What once required effort, reflection, and conscious adjustment slowly becomes part of how you move through the world without needing to constantly think about it. You no longer feel the need to check yourself at every step, to question whether you are doing things the right way. That constant self-monitoring softens. In its place, there is a quieter kind of awareness, one that does not interrupt your experience but moves alongside it. You begin to trust this more, not as a rule or a system, but as a way of being that has proven itself over time. You've seen how rushing creates tension, how comparison creates dissatisfaction, how overthinking distances you from what is actually happening. And you've also seen how attention, honesty, and presence bring a different quality to your experience. So you return to them, not because you have to, but because they make sense. There is also a noticeable lightness in how you carry your life. Not because everything has become easy, but because you are no longer holding onto so much unnecessary weight. You are not constantly trying to control outcomes, maintain a fixed identity, or resolve every uncertainty before moving forward. This lightness shows up in small ways. In how you start your day without immediately rushing into mental noise. In how you handle interruptions without becoming overwhelmed. In how you allow moments to unfold without needing to shape them into something else. Even when things don't go as expected, there is less resistance. You adjust more quickly. You recover more easily. Not because you are indifferent, but because you are not adding extra layers of frustration on top of what is already happening. There is also a deeper appreciation for simplicity. Things that once felt too small to matter begin to feel more complete. A quiet moment, a clear conversation, a task done with full attention, these no longer feel like placeholders between more important events. They are recognized as life itself. This does not remove ambition or curiosity. If anything, it refines them. You become more interested in what genuinely engages you, rather than what simply looks impressive or feels urgent. Your choices become more intentional, not because you are forcing discipline, but because you are less distracted by what does not matter. At the same time, there is a greater acceptance of limits. You recognize that you cannot do everything, be everything, or experience everything. And instead of this feeling restrictive, it becomes clarifying. You choose more carefully, you commit more fully, and when you let something go, you do it with less regret, because you understand that every path includes trade-offs. There is also a quiet shift in how you relate to time. You are still aware of it, still planning and moving forward, but you are not as tightly controlled by it. You are less likely to feel like you are falling behind or racing to catch up. Moments feel less like something to get through and more like something to be in. This changes the pace of your experience, even if your external life remains just as active. And within all of this, there is a growing sense of enoughness. Not in the sense that you stop growing or exploring, but in the sense that you are no longer operating from a constant feeling of lack. You are able to work toward things without feeling incomplete without them. You can enjoy progress without turning it into pressure. You can want more without rejecting what is already here. This balance is subtle, but it changes everything. It removes the constant tension between where you are and where you think you should be. As a result, life feels less like a problem to manage and more like a reality to participate in. And perhaps the most important part is this: nothing about this way of living is out of reach or reserved for a different kind of person. It is not something you need to earn or unlock. It is something that becomes available the moment you begin to pay attention differently. Not perfectly, not all at once, but gradually. You notice a little more, you react a little less, you return a little sooner, and over time, these small shifts create a way of living that feels steady, open, and real. There is no final step beyond this. No hidden layer that changes everything again. Just the ongoing experience of being here, meeting life as it comes, and responding as honestly as you. And after all of this has settled into your way of being, something very subtle but deeply important begins to change in how you see everything around you. Life is no longer divided so sharply into categories like success and failure, good and bad, progress and setback. Those distinctions still exist in a practical sense, but they no longer define your entire experience. You begin to see that much of what once felt like a problem was often just a moment being interpreted too quickly. Something happens, and almost instantly the mind labels it, judges it, places it into a narrative. This is good, this is bad, this should not be happening, this means something about me. And from that point on, you are no longer just experiencing the moment, you are reacting to your interpretation of it. As your awareness deepens, you start to catch this process earlier. You notice the moment before the full story forms. There is a brief space where something simply happens, without meaning attached to it yet, and in that space, there is a kind of freedom. You can still respond, still think, still evaluate when needed, but you are not immediately trapped inside a reaction. This changes the emotional intensity of many situations. Things that once felt overwhelming may now feel manageable, not because they are smaller, but because you are seeing them more clearly. This clarity also changes how you handle conflict, both internally and with others. When you are less identified with your immediate reactions, you are less likely to escalate them. You can pause, consider, and respond more deliberately. This often leads to outcomes that are not only more effective, but also more aligned with what you actually value. Internally, this reduces a lot of unnecessary struggle. You are no longer fighting every uncomfortable thought or emotion as if it needs to be eliminated. You allow it to be there, while also recognizing that it does not have to control your actions. There is a kind of quiet confidence that grows from this. Not the kind that comes from always being right or always succeeding, but the kind that comes from knowing you can face your own experience without immediately trying to escape it. You also begin to notice how much of life unfolds on its own, without needing constant interference. Breathing happens, thoughts arise, emotions move through, situations develop. There is a natural flow to things that becomes more visible when you are not constantly trying to control every detail. This does not make you passive. You still act, decide, and engage, but your actions feel less forced. They come from a clearer place, rather than from urgency or pressure. There is also a growing appreciation for things as they are, not as a concept, but as a direct experience. This does not mean you stop improving your life or addressing problems. It means that your baseline is no longer dissatisfaction. You can recognize what needs to change without rejecting the present moment entirely. This creates a more stable foundation for growth, because it is not driven by a constant sense of something being wrong. Another shift that becomes more noticeable is how you relate to silence and space. Earlier, silence might have felt uncomfortable, something to fill with noise, distraction, or activity. But now, it begins to feel different. There is a richness in quiet moments that was not as visible before. Not because something special is happening, but because you are no longer trying to escape from them. You are simply there, aware, without needing to add anything. This same quality starts to appear in many parts of your life. Waiting is no longer just waiting. It is a moment. Walking is no longer just getting somewhere. It is an experience. Even routine tasks begin to feel less mechanical and more connected to your awareness. And through all of this, there is less of a need to define what your life means in a final or absolute way. Meaning becomes something that emerges through how you live, not something you need to fully understand in advance. You may still reflect, still question, still explore ideas, but there is less urgency behind it. You are not searching for a single answer that will resolve everything. You are simply engaging with the process of living more consciously. At this point, the idea of control has almost completely changed its shape. It is no longer about controlling life itself, but about staying connected to how you meet it. And that is something you can return to at any time. Not perfectly, not permanently, but consistently enough that it begins to feel like your natural state. There is nothing dramatic about this. No clear moment where everything shifts forever. Just a gradual, steady change in how you experience being here. And see that? The less distance there is between you and the experience of truly living. At this stage, what becomes most striking is how ordinary everything still looks from the outside, and yet how different it feels from within. Nothing dramatic has necessarily changed in your circumstances. The same responsibilities may be there, the same environment, the same people, and yet, the way you experience all of it carries a different quality, quieter, steadier, less burdened. You begin to realize that living well was never really about rearranging the outer structure of your life as much as it was about understanding your relationship to it. For a long time, it can seem like the solution lies somewhere out there, in better conditions, better timing, better outcomes. And while those things can influence your experience, they are not the foundation of it. The foundation is how you see, how you respond, how you relate to what is already happening. This realization removes a lot of unnecessary struggle. You stop waiting for the perfect situation to feel settled. You stop assuming that peace or clarity is something that comes after everything is resolved. Instead, you begin to see that even in the middle of uncertainty, there can be a sense of stability if you are not constantly resisting what is. There is also a growing comfort with the unfinished nature of life. Earlier, there may have been a constant desire to complete things, to reach a point where everything feels settled and certain. But now, you begin to see that life does not really work that way. There is always something evolving, something changing, something not fully resolved. And instead of this feeling like a problem, it starts to feel natural. You no longer measure your life by how complete it is, but by how honestly you are engaging with it as it unfolds. This brings a different kind of patience. Not the kind that waits passively, but the kind that allows things to take the time they need. You are less likely to rush decisions just to relieve discomfort. You can sit with uncertainty a little longer, observe it, understand it, and respond more thoughtfully. There is also a deeper sense of responsibility, but it feels different from before. It is not heavy or overwhelming. It is simply an awareness that your choices matter, that how you show up shapes your experience and, to some extent, the experience of others. This awareness naturally leads to more intentional living. You are not trying to control everything, but you are also not moving through life unconsciously. There is a balance between allowing and choosing. You allow what you cannot control. You choose where you can act. And the more clearly you see the difference, the less energy you waste. Another quiet shift happens in how you relate to expectations, both your own and those of others. You begin to see how many of your pressures were tied to ideas about how things should be, how life should look, how you should progress, how others should behave. As these expectations loosen, there is more room for reality to be what it is. This does not mean you accept everything passively, but it does mean you are less in conflict with what is already happening. This reduces a surprising amount of tension, because much of the struggle in life does not come from events themselves, but from the gap between what is happening and what you think should be happening. When that gap narrows, even difficult situations can feel more manageable. There is also a clearer sense of direction, but it is not rigid. You may still have goals, plans, things you are working toward, but they feel less like a race and more like a path you are walking. You can adjust when needed. You can change direction without feeling like you have failed. You are less attached to a specific outcome and more engaged with the process itself. This makes your efforts feel more sustainable. You are not constantly pushing yourself to meet an ideal. You are moving in a way that you can continue over time. And perhaps one of the most meaningful changes is how you experience yourself in all of this. There is less distance between who you are and how you live. You are not constantly trying to become a different version of yourself. You are working with what is already here, refining it, understanding it, allowing it to evolve. This creates a sense of coherence. Your inner experience and your outer actions begin to align more naturally. There is less contradiction, less feeling of being pulled in different directions. Life, in many ways, becomes simpler, not because there are fewer challenges, but because there is less unnecessary complexity added on top of them. And in that simplicity, something quietly settles. You are here, you are aware, you are participating in your life as it unfolds. Nothing more as problems to solve once and for all, but as ongoing invitations to stay present, to stay aware, and to keep living, not perfectly, but fully. At a certain point, the need to keep adding more understanding begins to fade. Not because there is nothing left to explore, but because you start to see that clarity does not come from endlessly accumulating ideas. It comes from seeing what is already here, directly and without distortion. There is a natural settling that happens when you stop searching quite so intensely. The mind, which was once always reaching for something else, a better answer, a more complete explanation, a final sense of certainty, begins to quiet down. Not completely, but enough that it no longer dominates your entire experience. In that quiet, something simple becomes more obvious than ever before. Life is happening now, whether you are thinking about it or not. Every moment you spend analyzing, comparing, or trying to perfect it is still part of the life you are living. This realization does not make thinking useless. It simply puts it in its proper place. Thought becomes a tool you use when needed, not something that constantly pulls you away from your direct experience. You begin to notice how much of life was previously lived at a distance, filtered through interpretation. Instead of fully experiencing a moment, you were often thinking about it, evaluating it, or relating it to something else. Now, there is less of that distance. Moments feel more immediate, more direct. Not because they are more intense, but because there is less interference between you and what is happening. There is also a growing comfort with simplicity. You no longer feel the need to turn every insight into a system or every experience into a lesson. Some things are understood without needing to be explained. This changes how you relate to knowledge itself. You still learn, still explore ideas, but you are less attached to collecting them as a way of securing yourself. You are more interested in what is actually useful, what actually changes how you live. There is also a kind of quiet humility that comes with this. You begin to see how much of life is beyond complete understanding. Not in a frustrating way, but in a way that softens the need to control everything. You can engage deeply without needing to dominate or define every aspect of your experience. You can care without needing certainty. You can act without needing guarantees. This makes your relationship with risk and uncertainty more balanced. You are not reckless, but you are also not paralyzed. You understand that not everything can be predicted or secured, and you move forward anyway, with awareness rather than fear. There is also a noticeable shift in how you experience effort over time. Earlier, effort may have felt like something you had to constantly generate, often against resistance. Now, effort feels more like something that flows naturally when it is aligned. When you are engaged with something that genuinely matters to you, effort is still there, but it does not feel forced in the same way. It has direction. It has clarity. It feels connected to something real rather than imposed. And when something does not feel aligned, you are more willing to question it. Not impulsively, but honestly. You are less likely to keep pushing in a direction that no longer makes sense just because you started there. This flexibility makes your life feel more responsive. You are not locked into paths that no longer fit. You are able to adjust, to change, to evolve without turning it into a crisis of identity. There is also a deeper sense of presence in how you experience time. Not as something you have mastered, but as something you are no longer constantly in conflict with. You still remember the past, still plan for the future, but they do not dominate your attention in the same way. The present moment is no longer just a transition point. It becomes the primary place where your life is actually lived. And perhaps most importantly, there is less fear of missing out on some ideal version of life. That subtle feeling that there is something better you should be doing, somewhere else you should be, someone else you should become, it begins to lose its hold. Not because your life is perfect, but because you are no longer measuring it against an imagined alternative at every step. You begin to see that life is not something happening elsewhere. It is not waiting for you in a different version of your circumstances. It is already here, in whatever form it is taking right now. This does not remove the desire to grow or improve. It simply removes the sense that your current experience is not enough to be fully lived. And in that, there is a quiet kind of freedom. You are no longer chasing "hing left to add" that would fundamentally change that fact. Only more moments to experience. more situations to respond to, more life to live, as it continues to unfold in ways you cannot fully predict, but no longer need to.